Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. We are so excited to host Avalara today. Avalara uses automation to help simplify common tax compliance challenges in the retail industry. And today we have Brian Kinney and Brian Kelly with us to discuss more on how to navigate sales tax and tariffs. So Brian, go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Jada. So my name is Brian Kenny. I'm a sales executive at Avalara in the new business sales, working with MX Data's clients that are interested in business automation and compliance. And my teammate here, Brian Kelly.
Thank you, Brian. So my name is Brian Kelly, and I support the U.S. sales team. I support the European sales team for all global type sales in the cross-border industry. So I get into HS classifications, which we'll talk about today, and how those tariffs are affecting you and your organization. As we go through this presentation, you'll see the details.
All right, I'll kick us off with just some of the basics of Sales Tax 101, and assuming we can see my screen here.
You're good to go.
All right, so Avalara is a end-to-end compliance solution for businesses, and it's end-to-end. Often I talk about beginning to end, depending upon where your company is in the registration process, getting registered in the various states and jurisdictions for business. Avalara can help support the local registrations, state registrations, a vast number of licenses that may be needed for physical office space and buildings and distributions, et cetera. So we can help with that setting up of the business. We do have an enormous amount of tax research, depending upon something that you may want to learn about the product taxability, customer taxability. We have a tax advisory group that can help with historical tax risk, sales tax risk assessments and remediation if needed. And oftentimes in the supply chain, and certainly in retail, there is a document management or potential document management problem if you work with distributors and wholesalers. So we have automation to support the resale or exemption certificates. And then the basic bread and butter of the sales tax determination and calculation tool, coupled with the automated and the filing and remitting of the returns in the various jurisdictions. This product set does go global, as Brian will touch on a little later, but it sets up really nicely to get your business set up properly, which is one of the, as you know, when you open a store, there's a lot of work to do to get that actual physical presence. There's also a lot of setup potentially on the compliance front as well. Understanding the landscape can be very complex. There are 46 state-level taxing jurisdictions in the U.S., 45 states, the District of Columbia, and then underneath those 46 state-level taxing jurisdictions, there's over 13,000 other jurisdictions that are trying to take their piece of the sales tax pie. And understanding it can get very complex. Zip codes, as we say, is good for the mailman, not good for the tax man. So sometimes in one particular zip code, you could have various and variable tax rates, which can be an unpleasant buyer experience, could create complications in your workflow or your accounting or your reconciliation. So getting the specificity of that street level address can be very important. Again, with that many taxing jurisdictions, it is extraordinarily complex. Nexus is the term that creates the obligation or explains the obligation that your enterprise or your entity has with that particular state. And understanding Nexus also adds a level of complexity, the variety of different things that can trigger Nexus. I think we're probably very familiar with a physical Nexus. You have a location, someone walks into a store, walks out, that particular location has a sales tax rate. And that creates a physical nexus. Now there's economic nexus, which we're also probably familiar with. If you send sales from your physical location or you have an e-commerce environment, that triggers economic nexus if you hit certain thresholds. There are additional ways to trigger nexus, which we don't necessarily have to get into every one of them, but the two main ones would be the physical nexus and then the level of economic activity you have in a state if you aren't physically present. And understanding that is very important as your business scales and grows, because if you cross nexus or trigger nexus, again, that obligation to register with the state, become an authorized agent of the state to collect sales tax on their behalf. If you don't, once you've triggered nexus and you continue to operate as you would, you potentially can create historical liabilities, and a state will figure out a way to, at some point, try to catch up with you and say, hey, you've been operating in our state, you hadn't registered for sales tax, and that creates a whole nother set of problems. So understanding your nexus and the thresholds that you operate within is an important part of compliance and your kind of tax go-to-market strategy. There is a long list, as just like anything, if you open a new store, there's probably a lot of things you got to check off before you can open those front doors to customers. Similarly, there is a lot of compliance work to get prepared, as we mentioned earlier, whether it's the licenses, registration, setting up the business, understanding where you have tax obligations. And a lot of this Avalara can help support and automate once it is done. So yes, there is a bit of a lift, just like with any new venture, any new project, there is some things to do. But in this case, it does protect the business in a very, very sound way. So the government or the particular jurisdiction doesn't come asking for something that ideally would have been set up in advance. So there are some things that need to be taken care of, but Avalara is, like I said earlier, with that end-to-end, we can help support a lot of that initial setup. There are two things that, or actually maybe three things that we find is the biggest competition that people are reluctant, for lack of a better word, to maybe go with automation, is that they've been doing it the same way for a very long time, and they've ad hoc'd a bunch of things, added a system here, added a workflow here. And yeah, that may work to some degree, but at the end of the day, it's really an untenable process. The other thing is you just kind of hope for the best and do your business. And if you get called by a state, you'll just deal with it and happen. And the status quo, just not doing anything different than you've always done, whether it's hobbling a system together or just pretending that it doesn't exist. Those are oftentimes the biggest levels of competition that we fight against. And it is something that people have to understand. Oftentimes, if you get audited, that would be a catalyst to maybe change the process. If the scalability of the manual effort becomes too tedious for your accounting department or your operations department, that could also be a catalyst. So there oftentimes is a reason to reach out to Avalara. Hopefully it's a positive one, business growth, change, expansion, rather than a more negative one if a state gives you a buzz or something breaks in your workflow and now you have some operational issues. We do have a lot of analysis on the economic impact or the economic savings that Avalara can provide. Some of these numbers are aggregated over a 3-year period. I don't necessarily want to read you every one, but in the picture, when a business has become, growth businesses, not so much. This is more of the medium-sized business into enterprise, when you're utilizing a lot of internal resources, you're spending a lot of time, you're spending a lot of money, and you're trying to cobble together what that kind of disparate workflow that's been going on for many years. And when you really break it down, so Forrester Research did what we call a total economic impact report. And these are some of the metrics that they came out. This is more on the mid-size to enterprise size level business. And you can see the numbers are pretty staggering that we can save, the dollars, the hours, efficiency improvement. We do have copies of this if anyone wanted to ever take a look, but that's a report that came out last year. Again, this gives another slide just talking about our suite of products and understanding the process of getting compliant, the determination of tax and the calculation of tax, the reporting and the documentation necessary to maintain compliance. And we do have a variety of managed services that can help along that way. And this does go global again on all fronts. Part of the benefit of working with Avalara is that we work with some 1,400 different technology partners, platforms like a Retail Pro or any variety of the e-commerce environment, Shopify, WooCommerce. I mean, there's 1,400 of them. And the benefit is these are pre-built existing API integrations. So there's no development work, there's no IT work. There oftentimes could be some custom settings based upon your particular ERP or the platform you're utilizing. But at the end of the day, that integration has been pre-built and certified, and it can support all the products and services that Avalara has. Depending upon which ERP, we have an enormous breadth of products. So oftentimes that technology platform will build a specific breadth of API knowledge to suit that customer base. Sometimes you don't need to buy the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, you need to buy a handful of volumes. So whatever that technology platform feels is most beneficial to their client base, they will support that particular content. And Avalara, and being that we work with so many, we can support as much content as you want to provide. But the benefit is providing that automation. There is no more manual effort. There's no more understanding Nexus, understanding the taxability, understanding the product taxability. We monitor things, we track things, we accurately report on these things. So that manual effort of research, understanding, figuring things out. Avalara's secret sauce in the engine is able to figure that out. There is an association of your product category or product SKU to an Avalara tax code, and then that tax code knows that product taxability in the 13,000 jurisdictions and globally. So once you do that association, even at the category level, you never have to think about a tax rate change, a sales tax holiday, a short-term local municipality wants to build the community center and they're going to add 15 basis points to the local businesses. You won't have to think about that. You don't have to know when it's happening. That tax code will know every tax change that's going on. I don't know the exact number, but I heard recently there was tens of thousands of tax changes last year alone, whether that was a rate change, the product taxability change. You don't have to understand that any longer. Avalara has that associated into the multi-tenant cloud dispersion among everyone that's using Avalara. Everything is updated. And I want to say it's daily, but it's updated, if not daily, weekly. So any of those tax changes are captured in all of the systems, whether it's the Shopify, your Retail Pro environment, the POS environment, and as I said, any number of these other 1,400 different integrations that we support. And that is my short version on Sales Tax 101, and Brian Kelly can take us to international.
Thank you, Brian Kenny. So perfect segue with having tens of thousands of tax changes in the US. So how we correlate cross-border is exactly how we talk about all of our services domestically. And here's what I mean. When we have a typical AvaTax conversation, we talk about how does Avalara support all of these tens of thousands of changes throughout the years? How does Avalara support the different jurisdictions that we need to understand how to tax? If you look at this on a global scale, when we talk about AvaTax, which is the next block over, when we look at other countries, AvaTax does the same thing globally. It understands what those value-added taxes are in certain countries. It understands what those goods and services taxes are in certain countries. And here's the main key nowadays. It knows the changes to the tariffs. So not only is AvaTax keeping up with these tens of thousands of US tax changes, it's also keeping up with the tariffs that are changing on a weekly basis and the agreements between two countries. So now when we have conversations or when you think about AvaTax, it's a global solution keeping up with the rapid changes for both US and global transactions. Now, take the step down where we have that tax research in the US. We give our customers the ability to say, okay, what is our product? How should it be taxed? And into which state should we apply the appropriate percentage for this tax? You take that same mentality, move that over to the left side of this slide, and we get into the tariff changes. How does Avalara do the research so you as an organization can keep up with these weekly or even monthly tariff changes? So point being in that aspect, when we're talking about those two middle tiers, is we have a research program to understand tax changes and complexities. You move that globally. We have a research program and a team to keep up with those tariff changes and all the complexities around the agreements between two countries. Now, the bottom two panels is where Brian Kenny got into Nexus. Everyone is familiar with Avalara, maybe not everyone, but mostly everyone's familiar with Avalara on what is Nexus, how does Avalara support, where do we need to be registered in certain states, when do we trigger that Nexus threshold, and how does Avalara help with registrations? Again, you take that same mentality, you move that into a global aspect. Avalara also can help get registered in a global country, can also manage specific registrations. And oh, by the way, there are annual sales thresholds, not considered Nexus, but they're annual sales thresholds that trigger a responsibility to be registered and filing in that country. So no longer are the days that Avalara is a US automated, accurate tool. It is now a global, accurate tool keeping up with all of these changes. Go to the next slide, Brad. So this is more of an e-commerce type of focus, but think about the circle of an e-commerce type transaction. We want to make sure we handle all of the actual thousands of different product rates and jurisdictions internationally. It's AvaTax. Real-time calculations for duties and taxes, it's AvaTax. It's the same thing it does US, it does it globally. Now we're getting into those trade and treaties and favorable rates. Think about this. China and US has a specific rate on one particular product. It's totally different when we move product from China to Canada because of those trade agreements between two countries. Now you take the bottom portion where they talk about de minimis. There are actual import products that warrant tax being associated to it or import VAT. And then when it hits another de minimis threshold, duties kick in. So that de minimis threshold is super important nowadays because it triggers your international VAT and it also triggers your international duties and what tariff needs to be associated with it. We get into currency exchange and the ultimate thing, and when you look at the top left portion there, when we talk about mapping and maintenance, the same thing you have done with mapping your tax code to your item code, you're going to do the same thing and match the HS classification code, the harmonized code, to your item code. So now AvaTax recognizes tax code, tariff code, or harmonized code, there's different terms, and it matches your item, it's mapped to your item. Now AvaTax knows what to calculate in the US and what two line items to calculate globally. Okay, Brian. You go to the next slide. So here's a level, different levels of our service. We have customers, the top marketplaces leverage our services to the left side where speed is more important. It's low value goods. Get those products out to our consumers as fast and rapidly as you can, but we still need that harmonized code to somehow identify our goods. We can do that with customers like large marketplaces. I almost said two of the biggest names. They leverage our service to get those products out, cleared through customs, and assign the duty and tax assessment. We have other customers that move more to the right that say, we have higher order values. We need more accuracy with our tariffs because it's affecting our products because of aluminum or steel or imported from China. All of these different things affect which service and how accurate we want to make sure these products are identified for customs clearance purposes and assigned to the correct tariff percentage. So we have from speed to accuracy and everywhere in between to make sure we're providing each customer, because we're all different, the appropriate service necessary. What drives this is understanding what an actual harmonized code is or a tariff code is. And Brian, go to the next slide. So I brought this up a little earlier. So if you look at all three of these countries where we could ship this product into, a harmonized code or a tariff code is totally different than a tax code. Here's why. This 6-digit code is universal. That tells each country this product was made in China, it's got a rubber sole, it's got leather top, and it's a men's slipper. All of those factors make up that 6-digit code. Now, that agreement between China and Australia, this 4-digit extension tells customs clearance this is specific to Australia and it drives a 5% tariff. This 4-digit extension specific to the US drives a different tariff. And this, by the way, this slide needs to be updated because this tariff had just increased. So 9060 now will come with an increased retaliatory tariff attached to it because the agreement between China and the US affects the tariff. Go to the next slide, Brian. And what industry is this product utilized within? So it could be in the medical industry where it drives a 0% tariff. That country in Canada says, we want your medical equipment, therefore we'll give you your country an incentive to ship your product into Canada. If it's made for female, it drives a different tariff. If it's made for other, it drives a different tariff. So these codes are specific not only to the country of origin, but also the import country. And thank you for advancing that, Bri. Are your products even allowed to enter those countries? The last thing you want to do is put together a proposal or a bid and you realize, wow, this product is prohibited and it doesn't need to look like beer or weapons or things of that nature. It could be something as simple as bubble gum into Singapore or ballpoint pens into Malaysia are not allowed. So you want to know that before you ship it. Yeah, Brad. And this is a common movement. I worked for FedEx Cross-Border prior to coming over to Avalara. So not only understanding what we just talked about, but now how does the movement work? It's just as important. So when Avalara is working on the front end, whether it's in the e-com, whether it's in the ERP, just as Brian Kenny mentioned earlier about all the connectors we have, the key is adding the correct landed cost. And if you look here, we're assigning that harmonized code before the product ships. Carriers and customs clearance agents, their job is to move millions and millions of parcels a day. Their job is not to stop to make sure you've assigned the correct tariff code. So your job as a US merchant, manufacturer, or whomever, you need to make sure you're telling those particular carriers or customs clearance agent what your accurate 10-digit code is, because as I've shown you, it all comes with varying tariff rates. With it, they're going to know what that product is. It gets to customs. It's cleared through customs without any delays, and the assigned tariff is accurately assessed, handing it off to the final mile provider, gets to the end consumer without any surprise costs. I've heard nightmare stories of products being held at customs for a number of months. I've heard nightmare stories about customers being assessed a duty and tax at the doorstep, which is super inflated because no one knew what the harmonized code was. It wasn't assigned, and customs is not in the business to do the research for you. They're going to assign the highest percentage and move on. Someone's going to pay that inflated value. It's either the end consumer or they're going to bill back the US merchant. Someone is paying the inflated value if you do not process your parcel the way you see it on the screen. Pre-work, setup, super important. Then it flows through the system accordingly. And this almost reiterates exactly what Brian Kenny was going over earlier. Everything that we talk about in the US side of things, we also have a solution for global. We have the ability to help customers get registered. We have the ability to classify their goods accurately as pre-work. We have the ability to calculate both duty and taxes are broken out by country, whether it's considered a value-added tax or goods and services tax. Avatax understands it, and calculations happen. I'm skipping the orange for a second. Once you're registered, once you have an obligation, we also have the ability to make sure your VAT reporting or your GST reporting is in the appropriate format for that country. Then we help support the filing for you in those countries. And back to invoicing, when we talk about e-invoicing, not necessarily a US entity obligation at this point, But if we have customers that have entities outside of the US and they transact intra-Europe or intra-UK or wherever there's obligations for e-invoicing, e-invoicing is a solution that Avalara can provide to allow those invoices to communicate with those local governments according to how they want to be notified, which means, I'll give an example, and it may not be an accurate example. Italy needs to see and have a signature on the invoice before you can do business with an Italian entity in Italy. Some countries need barcodes. Some countries need pre and post approvals before they can send an invoice to a business entity or a government entity. So we have not only all of the same services, US and globally, we're a full service end-to-end provider to helping you research goods, calculate those goods, and report those goods accordingly, US and globally. Hopefully that was my last slide, I think, Brian.
Yeah, I think it was. So one of the changes in the e-commerce, Shopify, I should say specifically the largest, I guess one of the largest, if not the largest e-com platform that we do have an integration with. We've had a historic relationship with Shopify. It has changed, we think, for the better. There is a new integrated, maintained, and supported Shopify connector directly in with Avalara. It has a variety of new features and functionality. One of the more important ones I think that many people are certainly concerned about or thinking about is this cross-border functionality. It has the ability to work in the wholesale and the distribution side of the network, supporting some of the exemption and resale certificates I had mentioned earlier, and some other variety of some other product functionalities, I guess, like refunds and such. But it is a handful of new features that are an upgrade from, I guess, the previous setup that we've used to have. Just some slides highlighting some of the differences. And Brian, you could chime in here anytime if you see something. Shopify had previously only allowed their Shopify Plus members to utilize Avatax. That now is no longer. Any Shopify instance, any version can now implement the Avalara solution, which would be encompassing of everything that we had talked about earlier. One of the things I don't think I mentioned is certainly more relevant for e-commerce or folks that do a lot of send sales, is Avalara can track all of that activity and give you real-time economic nexus analysis. So you don't have to guess, you don't have to run reports, you don't have to think, how much have I sold into this particular state? We will monitor all those transactions to give you a real-time analysis and then a proactive heads up that you're at 80% of economic threshold. You've now crossed economic threshold. Avalara will not automatically register you and start filing or collecting on your behalf. That's a business decision, but you will have the tools and the information to make those business decisions.
I will add to something, Brian, when you have a second. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so the new connection has been supported by us, and it comes with that whole suite of automation for all the different products and services that we offer. What were you thinking, Brian?
I was just to sum that up, Avatax should be, or in most instances, the source of truth. And the reason I say that, because a lot of our customers are not only looking for the connector for Shopify and what's driving those accurate duty and tax calculations, it also needs to report back to an ERP system, a warehouse management system. You want all of those systems communicating the same exact numbers and percentages for both duty and taxes. So when you're doing your filing or when you're transacting, you want those to be accurate and reported accurately. So there's a variations within Shopify, as Brian Kenny had mentioned. So each customer of ours has something slightly different for whatever reason, but we can certainly support you in making sure Avatax calculates properly.
And then Shopify does have its white label service of what they call Shopify Tax. And there is some subtle differences between the two. And the upgraded version, for lack of a better word, I'll say when you say leave the Shopify white label, which may suffice, but scalability is always an issue. And as businesses grow and territories expand, sometimes it's best to get the most effective tool. And the Avalara version on Shopify does support that global tax calculation. We can support multi-channel sales, whether marketplace, e-commerce, POS, variety of marketplaces. So all the channels that you're distributing your product through, we can capture that. There's a variety of uniqueness that every client is different, every product is different, every customer has differences. We can certainly capture all those differences, whether it's more often not, it's more the product taxability and then the end customer taxability and uniqueness in how to associate a particular product transaction or category to a client that you're working with. So we do allow a variety of unique characteristics, if you will. This last little lower line here just talks about the different Shopify versions. And now Avalara can support any different, I guess, versions, for lack of a better word. We can support all those versions. So any Shopify customer that may have not had previous access to the Avalara opportunity now does. And any questions or questions from the audience? We can certainly take them via email. If anyone does have any interest to talk further about U.S. sales tax or the global sales tax, our emails are our names, brian.kenny@Avalara and brian.kelly@Avalara. So we are certainly open to have any conversation or answer any questions that may come up from this webinar. And I guess in closing, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we hear from you soon.